Well, welcome to Baffled. We are a podcast that helps you understand your misunderstood teen. And today we have Benny Reyes. Benny Reyes is a youth worker and former youth pastor, and he's still in the ministry even to this day. And so we are so glad to have him on the podcast today. Well, welcome, Benny.
Thank you, Jason. Glad to be here, man.
We're glad to have you here. And I know you've done a lot of youth ministry, and I know you, of course, from working at Gladden Park with students. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in youth ministry and what you currently do.
Okay, yeah, I was 18 years old when I got saved, and within that 2-year frame of kind of having a prodigal son moment, I call, at 20 years old, I got serious about serving the Lord, and my first steps in ministry were being a youth pastor. I've always had a heart passion for just the inner city kids and, high school age, middle school age, and just being able to work with them and becoming a youth pastor once I got, serious about ministry really helped me to see and experience a lot, just working with different types of backgrounds from home lives and, different areas that we were working with. So, definitely. That was in 2005, so been in ministry for 20 years and, in childcare, I guess you can say, or youth development for about 17 now.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Yeah. So working with youth, is definitely a blessing and challenging at times, but
It is, yeah.
mainly a blessing. But then, of course, when you're in youth ministry work in any type of fashion, parents, dealing with parents. Now, of course, you have a lot of parents that are great and are supportive and back you up. But then every once in a while, you have some difficult parents that kind of challenge you. And some of them are helicopter parents where they're kind of wondering what's going on and always want to shield and block their young ones from whatever the dangers they sense. And so what does healthy collaboration with parents look like in your perspective?
Healthy, that's a strong phrase because that implies that there's unhealthy, right? Yeah, collaborations or like things in relationships but I think a healthy one is one that develops trust and a rapport, just like you build that with the kids. Parents that are good parents, they would want to build that with anybody working with their kids. As a father myself, I know even just putting my son in school, or I want to know like who his teacher is, right. Sometimes I'll stalk them on Facebook or whatever I need to do just to make sure that, things are going to be the way that they should be and nothing's going to be fed that's extra apart from the curriculum that should be fed to them. So healthy relationships, I think is if a lot of it is on us to kind of just show them, not really prove to them, but it does get proven through time as you build that trust, you build, the fact that they see that you care. Not just on our side of it, reporting the bad. Like oftentimes we come and we tell the parents like this is what your son or daughter did throughout the day, and we kind of report just the bad. Sometimes I like to go back and just let them know like, hey, look, they did this and this and it was good. It was right. It's not all bad. So once they see that you care, I think it builds that healthy bond between, youth workers, youth pastors, and the parents.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I just kind of reminiscing about my days in youth ministry. And I remember even when I first started out, I had this one parent who just always had an issue and a problem the way I did things and was suggestion about everything. And it kind of, she even turned her daughter into this too, where nothing I did was right, and so you kind of deal with that at times. But then, of course, the more you do it, and then you just kind of you learn how to grow into that, where the relationship with the parents do get better. But there's always a barrier. Yeah. And so, which brings me to my next question: is what are some of the barriers that get in the way between you and the parent?
One of the biggest barriers that I found was just the in these settings, the expectation that some of these parents have of what they think your job is, and some of it is realistic, and other times they, like you said, you got the hovering, micromanaging parents, and that are just it's, you want to know some details, but some of them just really like are just like breathing on your neck and over your back the whole time because they have an expectation of what they think should be happening to their, like almost like an overnight type thing, change or transformation with their children. So I've had parents come up and say like, I don't know what you're teaching, my son, because he's still lying and stealing. And, I'm like, lady, like we only have him for maybe a couple hours, for a couple nights. There's also a follow-up. And I think that the barriers that I've found in my time in youth ministry and just working with kids altogether is when there's no follow-up at home. Like you spend X amount of hours on a daily basis, or however long you're with the youth, trying to bring in a structure that they may or may not have at home. And then you kind of create this, this structure for them. And then they go home to just go, if there's no structure, then there's no follow up from the parents. And it kind of like throws everything out the window. Like you can only do so much, so it takes a community, it takes a village, like they say. And I feel like a lot of times those are the barriers that we run into, is just that no follow up. You can always tell too, like, the kids that have that healthy relationship with their parents, because it doesn't even take an actual consequence, just a threat of like, hey, does your mom know you talk like that? Or like, do you say these words at home? And they fix it right away. Those are the ones that you can tell, versus the ones that are like, I don't care, call them, and it's like, what do I do now? Yeah. But it's like that follow up is crucial for helping the end game of like what we want to see with the teens, with the youth.
Yeah, and I think sometimes I remember the younger me, before kids, I would look at kids and I'm like, what's wrong with these parents? They're not doing their job. And then I became a parent, and sometimes my son, he will say things and do things that we totally do not agree with, and it's constant like, what are you thinking? What are you doing? And we're doing our part to try to guide and direct, but at the end of the day, they're going to make their own choices. So it's not always the parents' fault, but the Bible does say, train up a child in the way they should go. When they're older, they won't depart.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, sometimes parents, they may even feel alone. You made a good point, is we only have them for a few hours a week, and that's it. But the number one influence is their parents.
Yeah.
They see them more and they live with them, of course. And so how do you help parents understand, like you said about the village thing, how do you help them understand that they're not alone, that there is support there, and there is other people out there helping in the process?
In my experience with working with the youth, I've always tried to just communicate with the parents that there's always going to be an outside source of wisdom outside of the home. I mean, like, the Bible says that a prophet isn't honored in his own hometown, and sometimes that means your own home. I have 2 older boys, and they went through the teenage years, and just going through that with them, I've noticed that even in my own life as a younger person, I remember just certain things that my dad would try to instill in me. My mother would try to speak to me about certain things, and then I'll kind of like brush it off, like, yeah. And then somebody from the outside comes in that I respected, looked up to, and they say the same exact thing that they've been saying, and it's like, it's a switch that happens. And I try to communicate that with the parents, that like it takes a village, so they have to, through time and trust, allow us to be that outside voice for them. That if we're connected in the same vision and the same goal for your youth, for your children, to know that truly I want to see the same thing that you're seeing, but to trust us to have that, to be that influence for them. And I think trust is just plays a huge part in everything.
Sure.
Just to allow them to see that there are other people that will speak into their lives that really truly care about them, and don't get frustrated because they're not listening to when you said it.
Right.
But just to kind of allow it to happen, allow God to kind of navigate that. And God is a strategic God. When we understand that, you understand, and especially as a believer, that when you release them into, youth pastors, or you're praying, you're not, kind of like micromanaging everything that's happening, but you're praying and really believing that God is going to place the right words of wisdom and revelation for these people that are working with your children, that connects with what it is that you want to see out of your own kids.
Yeah, exactly. I think something you said that kind of sparked with me is, you can keep telling a student over and over, whether you're a parent or even a youth pastor or youth worker, and then it's another person sometimes that says the same exact thing, and it's like the light bulb goes on. Like, I remember doing youth ministry work and preaching every week, every Wednesday, And then you bring them to this conference, and the guy on stage with the lights and everything says the same exact thing you've been saying, and all of a sudden it's like fresh revelation, manna from heaven. It's like, hello, I've been. But parents feel the same way, right? Yeah. They've been hounding the same things over and over, and then the right person. It's like it says in Corinthians, some plant, some water, but God brings the increase. You know? And so it's kind of a team effort thing.
It is definitely a team effort. I feel like I've been in that place where I've been telling my sons something, and then we take them somewhere, or somebody says the same thing, and they're like, like you said, yeah, it's like a aha moment, and it happens. But like I said, it's something that I had to learn to not get frustrated with, because it's like, all right, God is working somehow, some way. He's using somebody to kind of speak that same life into them, and sometimes you just gotta, just without sounding cliche, let go and let God, just allow him to really work in their lives, and know that when you plant something, sometimes you don't see the result until, some trees years,
Right.
and there's a process that takes place in the unseen that starts to, die. It has to grow, it has to take root before you can actually see any type of, productivity. So a lot of times with our kids, it's the same thing. It feels like you can preach to them until you're blue in the face. But then somebody, as a youth pastor, I've seen that too. We take them to like a camp or like a conference, and then, they're like, "Oh man, that was mind blowing." And I'm like, "Man, I've been preaching that since like," but it's just one of those things that's like, it's confirmation. And when you're with somebody 24/7, you live in the same household as them. It's harder to take something like a word, because it's like, you're just saying that because you know me,
Right.
or you're just saying that because you're my dad or you're my mom, versus somebody that comes from the outside and they say that same thing. I think that's where the impact is, because it's like, whoa, they know deep down inside, or like I knew as a kid, is like, yeah, my dad has been saying that same thing to me, but when you said it, it just like, it confirms something in my heart, so it's truly important, man. It just goes right back to trust, trusting God, first of all, the Lord, and then understanding that he has a plan and a purpose for them.
That trust is a key word, because like we say, trust is important in any relationship, whether marriage, whether it's with your kids, but also working with parents. I mean, there's got to be a level of trust, because obviously they're entrusting their students to you. If not, then they probably wouldn't show up.
Right.
But also at the same time, you have youth workers, you have youth leaders helping you, and that's always a benefit. But sometimes I notice that youth leaders don't always engage with the parents, and I think maybe they feel disconnected or maybe even intimidated by parents. So how do you help youth workers? So it's not just always on the youth pastor or the leader. How do you get them engaging with the parents as well?
I think just take the initiative. I feel that's a highly important key, because parents that are good parents, they want you to ask those questions. They want you to ask, how can I help you with, your child or your youth? Like, how can I help you with, what is it that you're communicating to them?
Yeah.
What is it that you want to see in their life? Taking the initiative and truly just asking those questions will allow them to see, first of all, that you truly care. As a parent, I drop off my son somewhere, if the coach comes up to me and first thing they ask is like, how can I get to know him? Like, what's his favorite color? My youngest son, he's 7, is like, what does he like? That will let me know that they truly care, and would allow me to see that they want me to collaborate with them, to help them with whatever I need to help them with. So just taking the initiative. Don't be scared to ask the tough questions if you need to ask questions, to truly ask that. And I feel like taking the initiative, asking the tough questions from the get-go, and just listening, and just collaborating with the parents. It's a truly important thing.
Yeah, that's a good word. Initiation, it's just step up, right? And because not only we building future leaders with our students, but also if we do have adult leaders that are maybe even raising up to take our place one day, or just even to be effective, because you can only touch so many lives, and these leaders become your hands extended, and so not only are they connecting with students, but parents as well, because that's where they build level of trust. So they're not just always on the youth pastor, but as a team, there's like, man, these adults really do care about these students, and so it's really good.
I heard a saying, I'm gonna see if I can quote it correctly, but it was like, the kids don't really care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yes, yeah.
I love that, because it's true. It's like, not just to bring it only to the youth pastor setting, but it's like youth. I love working with you because they're so real. I love when we go to youth camp because they don't just clap just because it's time to clap or lift their hands just because. Like if you see kids, youth, young adults truly engaged in worship, engaged in the word, it's because they want to be there. They can't fake that. They don't fake that type of atmosphere for anybody. They are the most realist. Like if they don't like you, they'll let you know. You'll see it on their face. If they're bored, they'll yawn with no hesitation. If your sermon's not hitting, their face will be telling of it. And I love that because of the fact that when you can build that bridge between them, you build that rapport, you build that relevancy. You're relevant in a way where they can tell that you speak their language without trying too hard. There's a boundary there. Like I tell a lot of parents, like it's important to speak their language or at least understand it. Like you don't have to walk around and be like, oh, no cap, like I'm not lying. No, yeah, exactly. Like you don't have to try too hard, but just at least understand the terminology and just the style or the where they're at, nowadays. It's like it's a whole different generation. These kids walk out in the middle of July, June with hoodies and scully caps, and it's just crazy. Like I've never seen them, but it's just like, all right, what's the reason? I tried working at Glad, and I asked one of the kids that question. I'm like, why? Like you are fully prepared for winter right now, and it's June. Like why? And they're like, I like it. And some of them just, but like just going back to what I was saying, the conversation, the communication, like one of the biggest impacts that the book of Acts chapter 2 had when they saw that first big Pentecost, like that revival, right, of a lot of people getting saved and coming to the Lord, was the fact that they spoke their language. Like the tongues that they, like the Bible says that they spoke were the actual language of the people, which is why they were like, wait a minute, this clicked. Like this is why they, like, these people are, from here, and they're speaking our language. Going back to what I was saying about the parents speaking the language, like I said, it's not you having to try, because sometimes there is a cultural generational gap. Like I would never expect my 75-year-old father at the time when I was a youth. He wasn't 75 when I was a youth. He's 75 now, but I wouldn't expect him at that time being a what we call a jibaro from Puerto Rico, and trying to raise some inner city kids to speak anything that we ever said. But he at least tried to listen and kind of engage and understand some of it. But there was always that huge cultural and generational gap. I feel like a lot of parents growing now, that maybe from what I call the hip hop generation or the 80s, 90s, raising that, understand it a little bit better, because it literally, I'm 40, but it literally feels like I was just there. Like I had, a pair of parachute pants that you can fit my whole family in, and some Tims that, it just didn't make any sense, but they tried to understand as best as possible the language that was spoken. So once that is built, I feel like a lot of parents lose their kids in the transitions of their life because they're not speaking that language. They're not trying to understand them. They're just like, oh, you're just lost, or you're just this. And really just take the time to build that, that bridge with them, and see what it's really about, relationship. Absolutely.
Relationship, yeah. And there's so many resources out there to help with like the language barrier and stuff, but just spending time with them and having that connection where you can ask them, it's like, what does that word mean? And they're going to give you the facts. Right. They'll help you out with that. But that's what Baffled's about. Baffled's is about understanding your misunderstood teen, because we don't understand everything, and the culture's constantly changing and shifting, and it's hard to keep up, but that's why we're here. We just provide resources to help that parent and youth workers as well. So
it's an awesome tool, man.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being on here today and lending your expertise. And we're definitely going to have you on again. So
awesome. Yeah. Thank you for having me, man. Yeah. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely.
It's definitely a blessing.
Yeah. And for more content, make sure you like and subscribe so that you can keep up with the latest videos. Until next time, this is Baffled.